So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So, overcoming trust issues is one of my very favorite topics to talk about. It's one of my favorite things to work on with people because oftentimes we think that, now, I want to be very, very clear. People who have trust issues, your trust has been violated at some point in time, sometimes multiple different times. Sometimes it was in childhood, sometimes it was as an adult, sometimes it was a combination of both, right? So I always say that people who have trust issues, someone who has trust issues, trusted someone too much at some point in time. So for those of you who are experiencing it yourself, understand that yes, your trust at some point in time was violated. I want to be very clear about that because sometimes you might talk to people or you might talk to the person who violated the trust and they might try to gaslight or try to downplay it. It's not that big of a deal. It was just one time. It was just, you're just overreacting. But you have to understand that at some point in time that one of your boundaries was significantly violated, so much so that you don't believe that there's any other way to keep yourself safe outside of having these trust issues, right? And so it's important for you to kind of confirm that and to validate that within yourself, to understand that we really actually are dealing with pain. So I want to make sure that we're clear about that because because as I get going, you're also going to notice that even though there was a cause and a reason for you to have trust issues, we also have to understand, and what you're going to start to see is that the trust issues and the things that you think are keeping you safe really aren't. And oftentimes they are actually exasperating the problems even more. So one of the things that we have to talk about when it comes to trust issues is that we have to talk about technology. On one end, technology has done a great job of connecting people. A lot of people, I'm not a big fan of it. If you guys have followed me for a while, but a lot of people do online dating, right? We communicate with each other through text. We communicate with each other through email. We have social media. We're talking through social media right now as we speak. However, technology has also created a lot of trust issues as well, right? How many of you have experienced someone, right, that was texting an ex, communicating with an ex through social media, has, violated trust with technology? And I like to use this as an example, right? I always like to, whenever I do a presentation on trust issues, I always like to use the technology scenario as an example because it's something that a lot of times people think that they can create more trust with because they can communicate more. But it also, on the other end, you also simultaneously know that someone can violate, and so you start to realize that you don't have as much control over this other person and over the potential of you risking being hurt again as what you might think, right? So when we talk about trust issues, we have to talk about number one, right? So for those of you who are just hopping in, we're talking about overcoming trust issues. So first way to overcoming trust issues is to evaluate your reaction against reality. So Matt, what do you mean by evaluate your reaction? Like, I was the one that was hurt. Why do I have to evaluate my reaction? Our emotions are there to signal when something isn't right, but they can also cloud our judgment if we're acting out of anger or defensiveness. Self-reflection is key to understanding if you're shutting someone out based on fears that haven't materialized yet. So sometimes what happens when someone has trust issues is that sometimes we're proactive about trust issues. Sometimes we don't have evidence to support the violation that we might think that we're experiencing. So for an example, right? And for those of you so last week we talked a lot about people who have more of an anxious attachment style. A lot of people who have an anxious attachment style struggle with this, right? So just as an example, you're seeing someone, and let's say that it's been, a good relationship, right? No cheating, person isn't narcissistic, not a liar or anything like that, but one day they take a little bit longer than what they normally do to text you or to call you. People with trust issues immediately go to, this person must be cheating. This person must not want to be with me anymore. This person must not want to, right? And so these are the reactions that we have to take a look at. And this is where this is one of the ways that trust issues can become a problem even in a healthy relationship. So on one hand, just like I was talking about before, we can and we should acknowledge that there was pain inflicted on you in the past, that at some point in time you trusted someone too much. But on the other hand, we also have to understand that doesn't mean that we get to now overreact, right? Let me rephrase. I don't like saying overreact in situations like this, but we also have to pay attention to the way that we're treating people, and to make sure that we're not projecting our past pain onto new relationships, right? Especially ones that are not deserving, because what ends up happening is that ends up putting on too much pressure onto the relationship, and eventually that relationship can begin to cave and crack. How many of you have experienced that, right? Either you dated someone that had trust issues and there was too much to handle, right? And so it ended up faltering, or maybe you were the one and caused a situation. And what ends up happening is that this actually has the potential of creating even more trust issues, because ultimately when someone has trust issues, ultimately you have a belief system that relationships don't work anyway, right? And what ends up happening when you have a belief system like this is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and eventually that self-fulfilling prophecy ends up winning out, because you're always going to be looking for something, and you're always going to be looking for something that confirms your bias, right? And when you find something that confirms your bias, when I say confirm your bias, I mean that sometimes you'll literally make it up in your mind and you'll just assume, right, that this person is about to reject you, they're about to leave you, they're already cheating on you. And so sometimes you'll either exit or push that person away to confirm the bias that you already have. This is where trust issues, this is one of the ways that trust issues can become a problem, a large problem in relationships. So number one is evaluate your reactions against reality. Number two is communicate without being defensive. Key word, or key phrase I should say, without being defensive. So there's a reason for this. And I see some people already saying I'm guilty of this and this and that. Everyone at some point in time probably was, but I think a lot of you guys are going to be guilty of this as well. So old habits die hard, right? And that includes how we communicate. So for those of you, especially for those of you who are coming out of a toxic relationship and maybe have now entered into a healthier relationship or are dating and looking for a healthier relationship, sometimes we are in previous relationships, we can get very defensive with our communication, because we're all that toxic person, that narcissistic person may have always put us on edge, always questioning, there was always an interrogation, there was always accusations and things like that, always projection, even though they were the ones that oftentimes were the ones that were violating trust and caused the trust issues to begin with, right? So old habits die hard. So when we talk about communication in a healthy relationship, we have to understand that sometimes we need to take a moment to understand where the other person is coming from, instead of assuming that they have a desire to hurt you. I'm not saying that didn't happen in the past, right? Again, when we can acknowledge that we had trust issues, we can acknowledge that there was pain in the past, and we also have to acknowledge that not everyone is out to get us. I'm not saying that that's easy, right? Because one of the things, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that means that you have to also acknowledge that we have to put ourselves to a bit of risk, but we're going to talk about how we can minimize that risk. Instead of assuming that I already said that. Most often, they're reacting out. Most often, people are reacting and they want to communicate and they want to get to the bottom of something because they actually care. Right? Because they actually care. And that's the reason. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about this a little, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but one of the things that we have to understand about communication is that people with trust issues oftentimes try to avoid conflict because they think that conflict is going to cause the thing that they're afraid of the most. That some of their most violated times came through conflict, but we have to understand that there is such thing as healthy conflict. And when we have healthy conflict, that actually gives you reasons to trust that person. I'm going to say that again. Healthy conflict and healthy disagreements actually gives you reasons to trust that person because they're not just telling you the things that you want to hear. The hard part is that we have to be able to learn how to tell the difference between healthy conflict, healthy disagreements, how to communicate healthy disagreements without overexerting and without getting completely defensive. Because here's the part where, to get back to the original point of number 2, communicating without being defensive, the part that we have to be very careful of when we get defensive, what happens to the other person? So if I get defensive, right, and what do you mean? You're always accusing me. What happens to the other person? Even if they mean well, right? Even if they mean well, they also get defensive, right? Whoa, I didn't mean anything. I didn't. And so the problem is that when you get defensive, they immediately get defensive. And someone who has trust issues, who sees someone who's defensive on the other side, thinks that they have something to hide. And this is where this becomes full circle, right? You get defensive, and a lot of times people don't even recognize it, right? You get defensive, they get defensive. Well, if it's not that big of a deal, why are you acting like this, right? All of a sudden, the very thing that you're afraid of, you don't even realize that you are also causing. Give me a high five if you're kind of seeing how some of these things can kind of play out and how this can actually turn a potentially healthy relationship toxic. So number 1 is evaluate your reactions against reality. Number 2 is communicate without being defensive. Number 3 is be clear about what you need. Be clear about what you need. Communication is a two-way street. People can't read your mind. So dropping hints will only lead to frustration. To build trust, you have to be open about your needs and fears, even though vulnerability can be scary. So what happens through this process when we're not clear about the things that we need? What ends up happening oftentimes is that person doesn't know the things that you need and things like that. And what you're going to find out in healthier relationships is that when you communicate the things that you need, those needs most often, I'm not going to say that in every single time because no one's perfect, but most often are met. Now, if you communicate your needs and that person continuously violates, then you know that this is someone that you can't trust. So this is what I was talking about before when I said that we have to understand that there is some level of risk when it comes to learning how to trust. Now, when we talk about vulnerability and communicating, especially early on, that doesn't mean that we communicate our most vulnerable situations. That doesn't mean that we're sharing our social security number with someone that we just met, right? But we can share small little increments of vulnerability, right? To see how those things are handled and to see how things to see if those things are being violated. So be very clear about the things that you need. Also, what ends up happening a lot of times, and I hear this all the time with a lot of different dating coaches and relationship coaches and things like that, talking about like hold back and this and that. But the problem is that you put that person in a position where they're now playing a guessing game. Well, I promise you, not sometimes, not part of the time, but every single time, if you put that person into a position where they are playing a guessing game, they're going to guess wrong. And someone who has trust issues, when that person guesses wrong, what does it do? Kind of like the whole defensiveness thing, all of a sudden you start to think that this person either doesn't love you, they don't like. So let's use phone calls as an example. Let's say that you need and you would like for that person to call you more often than what they do. So people who have trust issues oftentimes won't communicate that, and they'll just say they should just know. How many of you have done that? Or how many of you experienced that or heard people saying this online? They should just know, right? So you don't communicate your needs, and guess what? Let's say that they guess wrong. Let's say that they just think that you actually want space. right? Because of a defensiveness that you may have had earlier. So now all of a sudden they guess wrong, and so now you see this as a violation of trust, even though it just your needs genuinely have not been communicated in that moment. I'm gonna take some questions here. So number one was evaluate your reactions against reality. Number two is communicate without being defensive. Number three is be clear about what you need. Be clear about what you need. Number four, and when we come back, is we're not talking. I see things about court. We're just not talking about court. I'm sorry. So we can cut out the whole not in court and this and that. We're not talking about court. We're talking about relationships. Number four is when we come back, we're give others a chance to show who they are. So let's get into some questions. And yeah, we're not talking about court. Not one time did I bring up court today. This is hard. My trust was violated when I was very young. My whole life is wondering what's true. And yeah, it's very difficult, right? It's very difficult. One of the things and we're going to talk about this, is that trust is built slowly over time, right? So one of the things is, and we're going to, like I said, we're going to talk about this here in a little bit, is that, the scary part is that, yes, sometimes we have to understand that we do have to put some risk involved, right? A little bit of risk, but it doesn't mean that we make ourselves so risky that we're violated to the extent that you were violated like when you were a child. So the problem that comes in at some point is that the reality of it is that there might be the likelihood of someone violating trust at some point in time is probable, right? But when you're building trust slowly over time, it's not like a level 10 violation, right? It's like we want to keep it at like a level 1, where like we can kind of see like some of these things. We're like, you know what? I probably should just not spend time with this person anymore. You're amazing, and thank you for saving my life. You are very, very welcome. Oh, this is exactly what I needed to catch this morning. You are very welcome. I'm so guilty of that. A lot of people are. Let's see what other questions. For those of you who want or need to, if you're considering working with me, if you come up to the link in my bio, we can book a free consultations. I do have availability tomorrow. If you guys would like to, if you want to book, we can book a free 20-minute consultation. Also, for those of you who want the replays of not only this live but previous lives, they are going to be on the big red play button. If you guys know, I'm talking in code, but it rhymes with Bluetooth, so you can go to the link in my bio. If you were following my previous Bluetooth channel, that's now some things I'm doing with true crime, so make sure you're following my new one. Can you give me another example of reaction versus reality? So reaction versus reality. So we had the phone calls. We have let's see. Trying to think of another, because I just use the phone calls as an example a lot of times. Someone coming home late from work, right? So when I say late, I don't mean like hours late. I mean that they're like 20 minutes late, 10 minutes late, 5 minutes late, and then oftentimes that's met with a lot of defensiveness. Where the fuck were you? How come you can, and all of a sudden, but the phone calls and like someone coming home or someone arriving late, or sometimes I've even seen where early it becomes a problem when someone has trust issues. Why are you calling me 5 minutes early? You've never done this before. Is there something I need to know? Are you trying to, and so everything becomes an issue, right? When, so those are some examples of reactions versus reality. What's your Facebook name again? So if you're looking for my Facebook page, it's Matt Pfeiffer Coaching. If you're looking for my group, it's Wounded Healers. Do I sleep? Yeah, I sleep. So a lot of people don't realize, it's funny because that was a part of the burnout and part of the reason why I needed to take that break that I did. I do create a lot of content, but I just have a lot of systems in place that pushes out a lot of content. I have a lot of different pages and things like that. I just have great team and good systems and things like that, but I sleep and I sleep well. Is this the reason to not trust? I feel like it is. No, it's not the reason not to trust. I'm sorry. I missed your original question. I thought you were talking about today's topic. My husband is an alcoholic who drinks when he's out of town for work. This causes me not to trust. So one of the things, when we talk about a lack of trust, that is all predicated on you as an individual. I can't tell you what you should and what you should not trust. I mean, I can, but I really shouldn't. Right? Ultimately, a violation of trust is a violation of your own boundaries and limits that and things that there might be some other reasons, right? If you dig a little bit deeper, you might actually be okay with him drinking, but there's a reason why you may not be okay with him drinking, right? The likelihood is that there's probably been some sort of violation when he's been drinking, right? Whether that was cheating, whether that he behaves differently when he drinks, those sorts of things. So I don't know all of the dynamics. He might, I've also seen where people don't drink and with their partner, but they do drink, other times because they just don't feel comfortable drinking around their partner and things like that. So some of those things need to be explored both as you as an individual, but also as a couple. But if there was violations that happen as a result of him drinking, then yeah, I can completely understand that. So I just don't have enough nuance to know. But ultimately, you have to decide on whether or not this is a trusting situation, or not. That's not for me to decide for you. The other thing is that everyone's tolerant. The other thing about trust issues and trusting a situation like this is that everyone's what people consider a violation is completely different for other people. The person I'm seeing, her and I, there's no problem if I were to drink by myself, and there's no problem if she were to drink, with her friends and things like that. But we also have a certain level of trust between the two of us because there's not been any violation. We've seen each other after a few drinks and things like that. So there's no violation there. But I've also been with people that I couldn't stand who they were after they drank, right? And yeah, if they were to drink by themselves off in another city, it would have really bothered me because I know how they were after a few drinks, right? So a lot of that depends on the situation. This is the reason why I don't teach people clear cut step A, step B, because what's good for me may not be good for you and vice versa. Alcohol is the worst in relationships. In a lot of situations it can be. So all right, so let's get back into the subject. So for those of you who are just joining, we're talking about overcoming trust issues. Number 1, evaluating your reactions against reality. Number 2, communicating without being defensive. Number 3, be clear about what you need. And then number 4, which we're getting into now, is give others a chance to show you who they are. This is probably the hardest part about overcoming trust issues. Giving others a chance to show you who they are. right? Trust takes time. This is probably one of the biggest issues, right? And a lot of times people who have had their trust issues violated, especially on the romantic scene, is that they've rushed into decisions with people. How many of you have done that, right? That the relationship was moving very, very fast. Then the person that you moved into a relationship with very fast was the very person that violated the trust, right? That's very, very common. How many of you have been guilty of that? We've been talking about that all week last week, and we talked about this yesterday, about moving relationships too quickly. And I compared it to going to like a sleazeball salesman that just wants this, just sign, just keeps on pressure selling you, just to get you to sign the paper, sign the contract without you reading the fine print. Trust takes time, right? When I say time, I always tell people you don't even really actually know someone until after a full year of getting to know them and actually seeing them. Trust takes time. We live in a world where instant gratification is the norm, but meaningful relationships require patience and effort. Don't expect perfection. I'm going to circle back. Let's put a bookmark right there because I'm going to circle back to that. To don't expect perfection. Allow people the time to reveal their true selves. So the reason why I put so much emphasis on don't expect perfection is because a lot of times people who have trust issues do expect and do look for the perfect partner, right? The perfect partner, the perfect situation, the perfect relationship. And the reason why they're looking for perfection, it's not because they want perfection. The reason why they're looking for perfection is that they think that this is the only way that they can keep themselves safe. I'm going to say that again. They're looking for the perfect partner, perfect relationship, and perfect situation because they think it's the only way that they can keep themselves safe. The problem is that there's no such thing as a perfect person. No such thing. There's also no such thing as a perfect relationship. Now, this is another moment that it comes full circle. So you guys heard me say that when you have trust issues, it can also lead you into toxic relationships. And a lot of people are like, how? There's no way. If I'm not dating people or if I'm like clearly steering away from people, like this is the best way to keep myself safe is to just keep myself in this glass case. But the problem is that we're all wired to not necessarily from a romantic partner, but to be with other people, right? And so what happens is that at some point in time through that isolation and starvation, you're going to want to connect at some point in time to people. And who is it that, at least they're not perfect, but who is it that presents perfection really, really well? What type of people presents perfection really, really well, especially early on? And we talked about it yesterday with love bombing. We talked about love bombing yesterday. Who presents perfection very, very well? What type of people? There you go. People who are narcissistic, right? People that have unhealed trauma, people who might be somewhere pretty high on that spectrum, oftentimes will be the ones to present perfection and present that they're the ones that are able to keep you safe. And what ends up happening is that oftentimes even someone with trust issues will put that person and put that relationship on a pedestal only to find out that this is the type of person who would violate that trust to begin with. The other part, right? So that's part one. That's part one. Part two to this is that we also have to talk about the fact that, again, there's no such thing as perfection. So the reality of it is that everyone's going to have their red flags. And so even someone who is being genuine, right, and just being real and being upfront and things like that, you're going to see things that you probably don't like. And instead of seeing them as things that you can work through, you're going to see them as deal breakers. Well, we probably need to do a video on the difference between deal breakers and red flags as well. Maybe I'll do that tomorrow. So we do have to give other people a chance to reveal themselves, but the key word to this and the key to all of this, slowly, slow down, right? We talked about this at length yesterday. Slowly over time, right? Allow for them to reveal themselves. And so what ends up happening through this process, I promise you with like, I would bet every single dollar I have in my account, every single day of the week, that even someone who is narcissistic will reveal themselves within the first 3 to 6 months. It never fails. People, one of the things, like people who, a lot of times people are like, well, I had no idea this and that. You likely saw it in the beginning, right? You just gave this person a pass because everything was so perfect, because sex was so great, so many other things. We talked about it at length last week. But we also have to understand that, like, people who are narcissistic, people who are manipulative, they're good. They're not that good. Not that good, right? So people do, over time, will reveal themselves. But the problem is that a lot of times we've already ingrained ourselves into their life and allowed for them to ingrain themselves into our lives so fast that by the time they did start to show themselves, that it was really difficult to try to pull back. So you had already moved in, already had kids, already engaged, already married, bought cars, houses, leases, things like that, and then they revealed themselves, right? And then all of a sudden we're trying to pull back, and all of that happens oftentimes within that first year. Take your time, right? Slowly over time, breathe, slow down, right? And I promise you that they will reveal themselves. So give other chance to show you who they are. And on the flip side, I always like to give the other side too. In a healthy relationship, they'll reveal themselves too. That this is a healthy person that you can trust, that they do communicate, that they are good communicators, that they are this, that they do want to work through things. Those sorts of things as well. So healthy people also reveal themselves too. It's not always just the negative side that a lot of times we just focus on the negative. We got to talk about the positives as well. So number 1 is evaluate your reactions against reality. Number 2 is communicate without being defensive. Number 3 is be clear about about what you want, about what you need. Number 4 is give others a chance to show you who they are. And number 5 is engage in open conversations that allow for disagreements. Engage in open conversations that allow for disagreements. I cannot tell you how important. So I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'm going to reverse this. Last week or a couple of weeks ago, I actually did a video about this. You can go back to the video. I always tell people that a red flag that you should actually watch out for in dating is the fact that this person. Thank you very much, Anna, for all the roses and gifts. One of the biggest red flags that you should watch out for when it comes to dating and relationships is someone who agrees with everything. Someone who agrees with everything that you do, right? And a lot of people are like, what do you mean? Like, I thought that if they agree with everything, that's a good thing, because that means that it's just smooth sailing and no arguing. And that's the problem with trust issues, is that you assume, like, you're so avoidant of conflict at times that you don't even actually see the fact that this person is actually just telling you the things that they want to hear, that you want to hear, which is, guess what? Manipulation, right? They're just telling you the things that you want to hear. So we want to have open conversations that allow for disagreements. Now, disagreements doesn't necessarily have to mean arguments and things like that. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a complete drag me out fight and things like that. But people who have trust issues, don't forget that a lot of times, the reason why they have trust issues is because of the violation of, abuse, whether it be physical, verbal, emotional abuse, things like that. And so a lot of times they're avoiding, they're looking to make sure that there's no disagreement, because they think that they can keep themselves safe. And again, this is another scenario that is actually causing them to get right back into the same type of scenario. People who are communicating openly with you are going to tell you, oh yeah, I disagree with that, right? And it doesn't even have to be like a big thing. It can be like just a small disagreement about favorite movies, favorite food, things like that, right? But you have to understand that there's no two people that are alike. None. Right? No two people that are alike. So there has to be some disagreement somewhere, right? So there has to be, right? So if there are none, then that actually is something that you should not trust. right? So when we engage in open conversations that allow for disagreements, it's natural to avoid conflict, but suppressing your thoughts isn't helpful. We just talked about that. Healthy relationships can weather disagreements, right? And it's important to respect that others may have different perspectives without trying to control or change them. And so we have to talk about both sides of this, right? So when we talk about disagreements, I always tell people that healthy relationships have the ability to have disagreements without being disrespectful, without feeling like they have to control, without putting the other person down, without trying to change you without you trying to change them. There should be like a healthy level of respect at the fact that we just disagree on this topic, or hey, let's meet in the middle. Let's find a compromise on this topic. But on one end, we can't avoid conflict, and on the other end, we can't get to a point where this becomes disrespectful. I always compare, you guys, for the people who follow me for a while, you guys know I used to use this analogy that so really what's the difference between healthy relationships and toxic relationships, right? Because when we talk about healthy relationships and toxic relationships, both of them have the ability to be loving. Both of them have the ability to be sexual, go on dates and things like that. So that's the confusing part, because people who are in toxic relationships, if they were to compare that part to healthy relationships, they're like, oh yeah, we do all that. The difference between healthy relationships and toxic relationships are actually the disagreements, right? This part that we're talking about right here. In toxic relationships, either they're avoidant of conflict completely, or, right, on the other extreme, that disagreements lead to disrespect, abuse, control, things like that. So I always compare this to boxing. Both healthy relationships and toxic relationships both have disagreements. They both have conflict. But notice that whenever there's a boxing match, both people typically end the match with respect. A lot of times they'll shake each other's hands, hug each other, raise each other's hands. Sometimes they had so much fun that they'll even give each other a rematch, right? Three different rematches and things like that. So the reason why they're able to do that is because they're able to have conflict with boundaries. And there's rules of engagement, right? You can't leave the ring. No hitting below the belt. No biting each other. Just different things like that. Toxic relationships are like a street fight. Anything goes, right? So you can follow that person home. You can bust a beer bottle over their head. You can whatever goes. There's no rules. So those of you who are struggling with trust issues, you want to learn how to have disagreements with rules, right? That there's still levels of respect within, and it's not even that people don't get angry. It's not even that people don't get upset. None of that, right? But can we disagree and still be loving and respectful towards each other, even though we disagree on a certain topic, or even on several different subjects for that matter? So number one is evaluate your reactions against reality. Number two is communicate without being defensive. Number three is be clear about what you need. 4 is give others a chance to show you who they are. Number 5, engage in open conversations that allow for disagreements. And number 6 is face your fears rather than letting them control you. This is really, really difficult, speaking from personal experience. Face your fears rather than letting them control you. Letting go is difficult, but holding on to fear may be holding you back. You have the power to push through self-doubt and build trust with others. It's all a part of personal growth. So oftentimes, you guys, and those of you who've been following me for a while, or even like the last couple of months, have seen where someone may have said something along the lines of, I just quit on dating. I just give up on dating. I just give up on this. I just give up on that. And oftentimes I challenge it, right? Because a lot of people are not dating out of fear. It's not because they really just don't want to be in a relationship. Or maybe sometimes people even say that. Oftentimes people who struggle with an avoidant attachment style will say something like that. right? It's not because they really actually, and I always say to them, what are you doing here? Why are you, of all the lives that are on TikTok right now, why are you in a relationship-based one, right? Talking about relationships and how to get into relationships, how to heal relationships and things like that. So there's a lot of signs that point to the fact that this person really does want to be in a relationship, but the issue is that they just don't want to be hurt again, is really what the issue is. And that's what the overall arching theme is with people who have trust issues, that they just don't want to experience pain again, because whatever it is they experienced previous was that damaging and that hurtful. Sometimes we have to understand, though, that we have to push through those fears. Like if you really actually want to date again, if you really actually want to be in a relationship, we have to push through those fears. Now, we can push through those fears with parameters and making sure that we don't experience the thing that violated the trust to begin with. But we have to push through the fear. One of the things that happens, and people say this all the time, people say it on the internet and on social media all the time, people oftentimes think that you have to heal. People think that you have to heal first, then you get to go live life. That couldn't be any further from the truth. Right? The reality of it is that you have to decide what life you want to live. Then that initiates the healing. So if you want to, a lot of times with people who I work with, they'll say like, Matt, you're right. Like, I actually do want to be in a relationship. I actually do want to date. But it is just like, I am just so scared. Right? I'm so scared to even go on a date, like to let alone like get into an actual relationship. And so we have to understand that sometimes we have to push through that fear. And I challenge people, like people I work with, I'm like, just go on, like it's just a fucking date. It's not that big of a deal, right? It's just a date, right? And like I'll even challenge people like, hey, go on one date and then literally afterwards say, wasn't feeling it. They're like, but what if it was the one? Then who cares? You'll find another one, right? It's not that big of a deal. And so, and it's not always with dating. I've worked with a lot of people, and sometimes it's with traveling, sometimes it's with the way they dress, sometimes where they live. Like it can be a lot of different things. But oftentimes, people who struggle with trust issues are oftentimes holding themselves back from the things that they actually want, and this isolation that they've created, oftentimes like becomes their own prison. So a lot of times they will present and they'll say all the right things as though everything is fine because they're trying to keep themselves safe, but internally it doesn't feel good because you're not actually living life, and you're definitely not living the life that you actually want.